We are very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Arjun Makhijani. Arjun Makhijani is president of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research. He has testified before Congress and appeared on national television news outlets, including ABC, CBS, BBC, and CNN. He has written numerous articles that have appeared in such publications as The Washington Post, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, Technology Review, World Policy Journal, Chemical and Engineering News, and The Progressive. He is the principal author of the first study ever done on energy conservation potential in the U.S. economy, the first global analysis of energy and agriculture in the Third World, and the first independent assessment of radioactivity emissions from a nuclear weapons plant. He is the author of numerous books, including Nuclear Wastelands, a global guide to nuclear weapons production and its health and environmental effects, Ecology and Genetics, an essay on the nature of life and the problems of genetic engineering, and Carbon-Free and Nuclear-Free, a roadmap for U.S. energy policy. Arjun, thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Thanks so much for asking me.
So start out briefly, tell us a little bit about the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research.
Well, we're a scientific institute, so we're founded to do thorough technical investigations on issues of energy, environment, safety, technical issues. But we want to do them so the public doesn't have to go get a PhD to understand them. So we have two goals. One is to do thorough scientific work on questions that will improve life and make us safer and healthier. And the other, to democratize science. Because I think unless the public has a grasp of the scientific issues as they affect us, now we can't cover all of them, we do cover some of them, that democracy is really missing a very, very important component because science is so much in the center of our lives.
All right. And you are also a member of the ANA, is that correct?
Yeah, the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability is an organization that has member groups. So I'm personally not a member, but I represent the Institute, and the Institute is a friend group. We don't necessarily endorse everything that everybody does because we have to maintain some technical independence. Mm-hmm. But yes, we have worked with the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability from close to the beginning, nearly 25 years ago.
So what issues will you be addressing today with the ANA?
Today I'll be recounting how the marriage of technical work and grassroots power has actually resulted in successes for the environment, for better nuclear waste management, for shutting down decrepit Cold War nuclear facilities. So I'm going to recount, our part of the work in supporting and assisting grassroots groups accomplish these things, and society at large, because a lot of people don't know, for instance, two of the largest, most important water sources in the West are closely affected by the history of nuclear weapons production. Hanford, of course, is the Hanford Reservation, where the plutonium for the Nagasaki bomb was made, has the Columbia River running right through it, the biggest water resource in the West, and surface water resource. And the Idaho National Lab, which is a nuclear Navy center and other things, reactor research center, sits over the Snake River Plain Aquifer, which is the largest contiguous aquifer in the West. So most people don't know that there's a ton of plutonium that was dumped in waste, unlined pits in the 50s and 60s over that aquifer. So a lot of our work has been to protect the environment and call attention to what needs to be done to remediate the ills of the past.
So both those facilities dumped major quantities of materials into unlined pits.
Yeah, the Manhattan Project was an emergency project. It was started to say, if Hitler had the bomb, we would all be subjugated to fascism. So Einstein wrote that letter. It was I've often said that had I lived here, been born in that generation, I probably would have participated in the project. but that I hoped that I would leave when it was known that the Germans didn't have the bomb at the end of 1944. But they didn't pay a lot of attention to the environment. There weren't the resources, there wasn't the time. It was. But after the war ended, a lot of those practices continued. So, for example, the highly radioactive waste from plutonium production was stored at Hanford in carbon steel tanks after neutralization with lye, basically. And so now we have a huge volume of waste instead of stainless steel tanks, because stainless steel was in short supply at the end of the war, during the war. But at the end of the war, they didn't change that practice. And so now we have 177 tanks with 58 million gallons of highly radioactive wastes that have been mismanaged in various ways from 1944, 1945 to really the present. And even the remediation program to take out that waste and solidify it, put it into safer form, is in very serious trouble because the technical concept of it, in my opinion, is not right. And a lot of doubts have been raised by others, including the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. It's a multi-billion dollar project, maybe the largest single public project in the country to remediate those tanks, 10 miles from the Columbia River. And I don't think the concept of remediating those tanks to date is sensible, because even if it all works perfectly, which I doubt very much, the amount of waste that is planned to be left in the plateau there just above the Columbia River, so Columbia River is downstream from all this waste, would pollute the groundwater on the banks of the Columbia River to hundreds of times the allowable drinking water limits for hundreds of years or thousands of years. That's the official plan for achieving safety. And I don't even think that it's going to work well. So part of our work is not just to be a naysayer and criticize official plan. In 1997, we did a study to which we put in the hands of the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability members, like the ones in Idaho and Washington State, that was called Containing the Cold War Mess. And one of our case studies was on the Hanford Tanks. And I could see that the approach of the Department of Energy was very risky and not likely to work. It was a silver bullet approach to a problem that was very varied, and where the chemistry of these tanks is so different from each other. It's very hard even to sample them and characterize them because it's dangerous to take out these samples. And I said that instead of doing a one-shot, build one giant factory, at the time for $4 or $5 billion, now it's 10 or 15 billion, do several different factories that are adaptable when you sample the waste and determine what's actually in there. And that if you have an accident, that you only write off one of several lines and the whole thing doesn't get stopped. So we actually had discussions with the department, which promised to discuss this with us. I told them their contract with British Nuclear Fuels was likely to fail, and it did fail. And now here we are 15 years later and billions of dollars later, and it's still a mess. And we still don't have a good approach because there wasn't the openness and there wasn't the guts, basically, to change course from something that people knew was unlikely to work. So part of our job is to present solutions as well as point out problems to get a better environment, get better expenditure of public money, because we're spending a lot of money on this stuff.
Talk a bit about your thoughts on the disaster that happened at Fukushima over a year ago and what that means for U.S. Nuclear facilities.
Yeah, so if we step back a little bit to Chernobyl, which was the worst reactor accident which happened in the Soviet Union in Ukraine in 1986. When that happened, people in the West, and Japan is included in the West in this sense, Western capitalist countries, said, oh, that's the bad, bad Soviets. You know, they had a poor reactor design. They don't have independent regulation. It couldn't happen here. And of course, it has been known since the 50s that catastrophic accidents are possible with all reactor designs that we have operating. Now, Fukushima has shown, unfortunately, it took Fukushima to shine a light on that. 3 Mile Island apparently wasn't enough. 3 Mile Island wasn't catastrophic in the way Fukushima is catastrophic. And in Chernobyl, 2 reactors almost caught fire. It was the firemen who saved the second reactor. So multi-reactor accidents were actually, we should have thought, and I have to say, even I didn't think. I didn't pay close enough attention. So there's a mea culpa here. 4 reactors, and really 7 units, 3 reactors that were operating, and 4 spent fuel pools. So 7 major sources of radioactivity in parallel at the same time. 3 big explosions and probably 1 small one. We still don't understand Fukushima completely. In a capitalist country, that has woken up much of the world to the, what is going on in Japan downwind from Fukushima is truly, truly, truly tragic. And it's not just about the radioactivity or what the risks are, or it's 1 in 100, or how many people are going to get cancer. It's what the people who live there. So yesterday, I was at a congressional briefing at which somebody whose family lives in Fukushima spoke. And she said, my father lives there. He's old. He doesn't want to leave. And my sister can't leave because he doesn't want to leave. The children who are living there going to school and contaminated. Now, suppose somebody told you your child would have a 1 in 100 risk of getting cancer. It's very small. Send them to a contaminated school, which has the same limits as for workers for radiation exposure. And 99 chances out of 100, so 30% of the people, 30% of us are going to get cancer at some point. Suppose you sent your kid to that school and 30 years later, your daughter got breast cancer. Most likely that breast cancer may not be due to your sending, but you would never know. And would you ever forgive yourself? I don't think so. As a parent, I don't think I would forgive myself for making that decision. So the kind of dilemmas that arise out of nuclear accidents really should be a much, much bigger wake-up call than they have been in this country. I was very, very sorry to see President Obama stand up a week after and say, we're going to build nuclear power plants. Fortunately, there's been a little bit of a step back. Nuclear power plant licensing is currently suspended in this country, not because of Fukushima. We tried that, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission refused, but because we don't know what to do with the waste. And we pointed that out, and the NRC said we do. We went to court, and the court agreed with us. And for the moment anyway, new licenses and license extensions are suspended, partly as a result of work we did at the Institute with environmental lawyers and grassroots groups. But Fukushima is a tragedy that will continue for decades. It is shaking up the political system in Japan, as Chernobyl did. Chernobyl was sort of the thing that tipped the Soviet Union over. Not the biggest thing, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back, the proverbial thing, the cover-up of Chernobyl. And now it's proving that the cover-up or the mismanagement of Fukushima, and to some extent the things that were not told to the public, that were known to the officials, governmental or TEPCO or the power company, are shaking up the political system of Japan. They're shaking up the economic system of Japan. Today, 17% of the reactors in the West, light water reactors in the West, are shut, largely because of Fukushima. 53 in Japan, 8 in Germany, and 4 in the United States that are not related to Fukushima.
One of the benefits that Japan has from this disaster, it appears to me, is that their grasp of technology surpasses most countries. Can they easily move to renewables there?
Well, Japan is a very, very heavily populated country. And but I still think, so I haven't studied like Japan like I have studied the United States when I wrote Carbon-Free, Nuclear-Free Roadmap for U.S. Energy Policy, 100% renewables. But we did do a study on Japan comparing offshore wind with using plutonium as fuel 10, 12 years ago. And I think we showed that it was much more economical to go to offshore wind, and much better, even at the costs that prevailed then. Today, of course, those technologies are all cheaper. I think that with the technological situation of Japan, not only would Japan be able to do mostly renewables or all renewables. I'm not sure. I have to hedge what I say because I haven't studied it. But if Germany can do it, I think Japan can also do it. I think Germany is clearly headed to 80 to 100% renewable electricity. They are succeeding. I point out often, so I think if Germany can succeed, Japan can succeed. And Germany is headed to success, and they are going to be an energy leader. They already have an export surplus with China, and we don't. I often tell people, what do they know that we don't know? And so if the Japanese decide to go in that direction, and they're roughly going to go in that direction, there's a lot of big business, big political, institutional, bureaucratic pressure to go in the direction that was there before. So they've said, we're going to create an independent regulatory agency, and then they appointed a former nuclear bureaucrat to head it. But there's a conflict there. I think if Japan firmly decided to do renewables, I think between renewables, smart grid, demand dispatch, the technology in electricity is evolving today in the way that the technology in communications was evolving in the 80s and 90s. So today's grid is a 100-year-old model, just like Ma Bell's, landline was a 100-year-old or 80-year-old model at that time. And I am pretty sure, because I'm a member of the Power Engineering Society, I get the journals, I am pretty sure that in 25 years, the grid is going to be as different from what it is today as the telephone system, communication system, internet system, the iPhones are different than the technologies of the 70s and 80s. It's happening right now as we speak. The question is, how big a role will the U.S. play in it? Or will the U.S. be left behind moaning and complaining about China while everybody else takes the lead, especially Japan and Germany?
Talk a bit, we've got about 10 minutes left, talk a bit about what you discovered in writing your book, Carbon-Free and Nuclear-Free. Can we really move to renewables in this country, or is that just a pie-in-the-sky kind of greenwashing?
Well, in 2006, my former boss, dear friend and mentor, S. David Freeman, who was really the father of energy policy, worried about oil imports when he worked in the White House in the 60s, started the Energy Policy Project in Washington. I worked for him in Washington during the first energy crisis in '73. He was later chairman of TVA. He's run public utilities all his life, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and so on. So he knows whereof he speaks about when he says electricity. He made this speech that shocked me. He said we should get rid of oil, we should get rid of coal, we should get rid of nuclear, and we should go to solar, 100%. And I went up to him and I said, Dave, you're going to send every industry we have left to China. It's going to be so expensive to try to do this. And he said, Arjun, don't be a knee-jerk naysayer because you haven't looked at this for a while, which was quite true. Why don't you do the study? And my other friend, Helen Caldecott, the famous nuclear disarmament doctor, was there, who sponsored the conference. And she said, if you do the study, I'll raise the funds. This is the most important speech I've heard. We have to save the planet. It's in intensive care. So I agreed to take a look. I didn't think you could actually do it. So I didn't promise to come up with an answer of how to do it. I promised to come up with an answer of whether it could be done and what it would cost and how fast. I was totally surprised to find what I just told you a few minutes back, that we are in the midst of a technological revolution. So it's not that solar photovoltaics are immediately economical, but I could see the direction had drastically changed. Wind turbines already economical, more economical than nuclear, for example. We're developing storage systems that were rapidly becoming economical. So I looked at technologies that we had in hand that were either economical or would be economical in 10 years, given the right public policies. And I concluded that we could have 100% renewable. This country has so much renewable energy potential, so much technological potential, so much, and of course, entrepreneurial potential. Just the wind energy potential in the Midwest and Mountain West belt is greater than all of the oil production of all OPEC countries put together. So, and the solar energy potential is even bigger than that. You know, 14% of the area of the state of Nevada could supply the entire country's electricity requirements. I'm not saying we should do that because it would be too centralized and too vulnerable from a security point of view. But just to illustrate, Germany is a damp, cloudy country which has worse solar potential than Seattle, if you can imagine that. And they have, I think, 4 times the installed solar capacity. In a country of 80 million people, and we have 310 million, 11 million people in this country. So it's a question of, and looking back 4 or 5 years after I finished my book, I must say that I was too cautious. I like to be cautious. I don't like to be wrong on the sort of optimistic side. I think technology is moving much faster. Sort of solar photovoltaics are half the cost of what they were back then, 5, 6 years ago. They're much cheaper in Germany than here because they're doing things right. And we have a mishmash of policies. But it's headed in the right direction. And I think the Pentagon is actually playing an interesting role in this. They're going into renewable energy in a big way for security reasons, you know, because the transport of oil into Afghanistan turned out to be such a giant headache. The Pentagon gave us the internet, you know. So I think they're going to play a role in the renewable energy future. I think it's coming. The question is, and I think it'll come faster than what I thought. There's some questions, you know, what about China and how fast will they do it? What about India? And will the sort of incoherence of U.S. policies so completely different in California than in other states? You know, the West is actually the West Coast is actually, you know, bright shining light in this area, including Washington State. So I think that future is coming. The question is, who will be positioned to be in the 21st century? Or are we going to make plutonium just to boil water, which I think is really 20th century. That's what nuclear technology is. We're making plutonium just to boil water. I think we can do a lot better. And it's all here. We need to have the guts and vision to do it.
And do you see the implementation of that coming from top down, from federal, state entities, or can people push from the individual community level?
I think the federal government's actually doing some very important things. And so in a very difficult environment, Obama hasn't been able to put a big picture policy into place, not because he hasn't wanted to, but because he had other priorities at first and then it was too late. But I think the federal government is doing some very important things, but the coherence really will come from 3 other areas. It will come from the grassroots. It will come from businesses. You know, Walmart is businesses are realizing if they put solar photovoltaics on their roofs in a big way, They're insulated against fluctuations in electricity, fluctuating gas prices. And it will come from the states, state and local governments. So it'll come from this combination of three things with some points of light, including, interestingly, the Pentagon at the federal level. I actually wanted the Pentagon to put up a solar system on their parking lot outside the Pentagon so everybody taking off and landing from National Airport would see it. We actually negotiated a little bit with the Pentagon. They said, we don't have the money to do this. And I said, we'll go lobby for you to have the money for this project. But eventually they decided that there were too many risks and maybe security issues and so on. They didn't do it, or haven't done it yet.
Well, that's been one of your ideas you've been pushing for a while, is turning parking lots into giant photovoltaic farms.
It's not my original idea. You know, when I was researching, I found actually there's a Navy base in San Diego that had put up solar photovoltaics in their parking lot in 2002. And, you know, companies had done it. I think Kyocera. So I saw that an idea that should be promoted more is photovoltaics, floating solar panels on hydropower reservoirs, so that during droughts and so on, you reduce the evaporation because it's covered by. So it's a perfect match. You don't have to build new transmission lines. You know, of course, there's a conflict with people who have recreation and boating, but I hope some compromise will be found and we'll have floating solar photovoltaics on parts of hydro reservoirs to improve the water situation, reduce evaporation, not have to have new transmission lines for solar energy and so on. So there are a lot of new ideas out there. The question is how we're going to arrange these ideas and how fast are we going to do it? Because the climate problem is very serious. And those who say the models are wrong are actually right, but they're not correct about the direction in which they're wrong. It's actually much worse than what is in the official models of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
We are talking with Arjun Makhijani. He is president of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research and author of Carbon-Free and Nuclear-Free, a Roadmap for U.S. Energy Policy. Arjun, how can people find out more about your work? Could you do a regular newsletter as well?
Yeah, we do a newsletter now, electronic only. It's called Science for Democratic Action. You can go to our website, IEER.org, and almost all of our material is available for free download. We have some books that have been published by third parties. You can download Carbon-Free, Nuclear-Free, for example, free. It has been done, I think, by, I don't know, somewhere near 750,000 times it has been downloaded in the last 5 years. So you can do that. You can, of course, write to us. You can get on our email list. So IEER.org.
All right. Well, unfortunately, with that, we are out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us this morning.
Well, I really enjoyed it.